Around 2000, something remarkable happened to the Italian economy. It stopped growing and went into a 20-year-long decline. Even if you adjust for population, Italy's performance was strikingly worse than its main competitors. If we look at productivity, Italy fell far behind. It was effectively 2 lost decades, with real wages stagnating. Italy was an outlier, but 10 years later and the UK embarked on a similar journey. Now, real GDP in the UK has done relatively well since 2010, but 75% of this economic growth is due to rising population. If we look at average incomes, there's a similar story of stagnation. So is the UK copying the Italian economic disease, or is it something different? And does Italy's recent recovery offer a more hopeful future? In the first half of 2000, the UK really outperformed the Italian economy. One difference at the time was that Italy had joined the euro, the UK didn't. Now, in the post-war period, the Italian economy did relatively well. It caught up a lot with its near northern neighbours. In fact, for a time, Italy had similar growth rates to Germany. But a part of this economic story in the post-war period was that Italy was able to rely on a frequent devaluation in the lira. Italy had higher inflation, lower productivity, but it could retain competitiveness by reducing the value of the currency. Italian manufacturing stayed competitive and growth kept going. But once Italy joined the euro, they no longer had this option. It wasn't possible to devalue. So Italian goods just became more uncompetitive. This led to a current account deficit and lower demand. Now, for a time, Italy was just able to increase debt levels to maintain spending. But all this came crashing down in 2012 with the euro debt crisis. Bond yields soared. Now, in response to this crisis, Italy embarked on a decade of austerity, cutting spending, higher taxes, trying to retain a primary budget surplus. But this was very difficult because Italy spent at least 8% of government revenue just on debt interest payments. Debt levels in Italy are amongst the highest in the OECD. And the euro-enforced austerity caused Italy to have a double-dip recession, with GDP falling quite significantly, and there was little Italy could do about it at the time. Italy had no independent monetary policy, no exchange rate, no independence of fiscal policy. How does the UK compare to this? Well, retaining its own currency definitely gave the UK more flexibility. The great financial crisis really hit the UK economy, and it led to a 30% depreciation in the value of sterling, which is a really big fall. Now, in theory, this depreciation should make UK exports more competitive and boost economic growth. Now, in truth, from the global economic downturn of the 2010, exports didn't increase very much at all. But it would have perhaps been worse without this depreciation and boosted demand. Also, with an independent central bank, the UK could provide liquidity. There was no bond crisis. In fact, bond yields fell in the UK, even though debt levels rose. Yet, for different reasons to Italy, the UK did decide to embark on a similar austerity programme. Government investment was cut, spending was cut at least for a few years, and this led to a period of low economic growth. The recovery of 2010 was sniffed out, and we had poor investment, poor productivity for the next decade. UK investment has been the lowest in the G7, and austerity is one of the causes behind it. Now, the Bank of England did try to boost the economy through quantitative easing, but this mainly pushed money into the finance sector and boosted the housing market rather than actual real investment. Now, although austerity is a factor behind low growth in both countries, there's a lot more to it than that. You don't get such a long decline in output without supply-side problems too. In Italy, it's claimed there's an underlying problem of cronyism and corruption, and this has infiltrated many firms and government departments, and this has created a drag on dynamism and innovation. It's also very striking to look at levels of skilled labour. Italy has a real problem with high levels of low-skilled workers compared to its competitors. Italy also has a very low level of young people in education or training, one of the worst in Europe. Now, the UK is doing a bit better than Italy, but still it falls behind other countries. And the UK particularly has a problem with lack of vocational skills, and they've had difficulty filling many vacancies because firms just can't find the workers. Another problem that Italy has faced is that a large share of the most skilled and most educated workers have actually emigrated, left the country. So they're left behind with fewer workers. And this is a real problem because Italy's got a declining population. In the past 6 years, it's gone down. Unlike the UK, where we've seen quite a rapid growth in the population and it's forecast to keep growing. Italy has seen a really dramatic fall in the birth rate, and already they're seeing a fall in the working age population, an increase in the dependency ratio, the number of retired people. And this is a problem economically, not just for real GDP, but real GDP per capita, because older people will tend to save more, consume less, and also there's less motivation for firms to invest with an ageing population. Now, to some extent, the UK has avoided this problem through high levels of immigration, and in fact, even in the coming years, still expect it to grow. But Italy definitely been hampered by this ageing population. For example, quite a striking statistic. Italy spends 16% of GDP on pensions. The UK spends just 5%. That's a big difference. Now, of course, not everything is about economics. Life quality in Italy is quite good. Life expectancy is one of the highest in the world. Even if the economy is not doing well, at least you can have a good life in Italy. But the problem is that this means the government have to spend much more pensions. In 2021, pensioners were 41% of the Italian workforce. But in the UK, the share of pensioners was just 33%. But a concern going forward is that the UK is going to see more of that ageing population, and it'll be a similar problem to what Italy's been having for the past 2 decades. Now, another reason often cited for Italian economic difficulties is political uncertainty. As we often like to point out, Italy's had 68 governments in 77 years. The early 2000s were particularly problematic with the Berlusconi era. And by contrast, the UK's first past the post system is supposed to provide strong, stable government with large majorities able to introduce long-term reforms in the interest of the long term. But really since 2016 and Brexit, the UK is doing its best to try to catch up with Italian political chaos. We've had frequent changes of Prime Minister, changes of Chancellor, U-turns on policy, and an increased short-termism. So this political uncertainty has definitely been a factor behind lower investment levels in the UK. And since 2016, the UK economic performance has been adversely affected by Brexit, not just the uncertainty that it created, but also the actual change to tariff levels and customs duties, which has particularly affected firms importing and exporting to Europe. It is a factor why UK real GDP per capita is still lower than pre-COVID levels. Now, ironically, in the past 4 years, Italy has had one of the fastest growth rates in Western Europe. Now, admittedly, it's particularly low bar, but Italy has grown at a faster rate. And this is due to both government tax credits, but also European Union subsidies, part of the post-COVID recovery plan. Italy has already received 100 billion euros and will receive another 100 billion in the coming years. So this has been a real big boost to recovery and investment. Italy, the biggest recipient. By contrast, UK on the outside of the European Union and actually losing investment as a result. Another reason people ascribe to Italy's long-term decline is a big regional divide between north and south, which rather than getting better, in a way has kind of grown in recent decades. Real GDP per capita is around 40% lower in the south than in the north, and there's a big disparity with the north attracting manufacturing and investment finance, and the south really been left behind. And this has been a drag on overall national economic growth. Now, the UK, in a way, is something quite similar. We have a very strongly London-centric economy. Real GDP per capita is much higher in London than elsewhere in the country. London tends to attract most of the investment, jobs, and economic growth. And it's been a problem that delegating to regions and other cities we've not been very good at it. And a recent report by Centre for Cities says that this lack of investment and growth in secondary cities like Manchester and Leeds is a big factor behind the UK's low growth. In many ways, the stories of the UK and Italian economic problems do have differences. Italy, much more affected by an ageing population, cronyism, membership of the euro definitely caused problems, at least for the first decade or so. By contrast, the UK has quite a lot of self-inflicted wounds. The austerity of the 2010s, Brexit, increased political instability. But also the two countries do share some similarities. There's a long-term problem with low productivity growth, shrinking working age population, people not wanting or able to do jobs where there's vacancies. But what about Italy's recent economic recovery? It's quite interesting to see Italy go from the worst to the best performer. And this video goes into more detail about whether it's going to be a real recovery or just smokescreen and mirrors. So please do check out my new global economics channel, trying to get it off the ground. But if you're interested in this kind of topic, you'll definitely like the channel.